To our amazing viewers at Cheating Tales Lab, welcome and thank you. Your presence makes these stories worth sharing. We'd love to hear, which part of the world are you joining us from? Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Fall. Vincent Torres had built his construction company from the ground up, starting with a single pickup truck and a toolbox his father left him. By 32, Torres Construction employed 47 people and had contracts worth millions across the city. He lived in a modest but comfortable home with his wife Diana and her 2 children from a previous relationship, Emma, 16, and Tyler, 14. Vincent had raised them as his own since Diana's first husband died in a motorcycle accident when the kids were young. Diana Torres was everything Vincent thought he wanted in a woman. Blonde, petite, with a laugh that could light up a room and a way of making him feel like the most important man alive. They'd been married for 8 years, and despite the usual ups and downs, Vincent believed they had something solid. He worked long hours to provide for the family, often coming home exhausted, but satisfied knowing he was building something lasting. Blake Morrison owned a small auto repair shop 3 blocks from Vincent's office. He was younger than Vincent by 5 years, with the kind of easy charm that made people trust him instantly. Vincent had taken his work trucks to Blake's shop for years, considering him not just a business contact but a friend. Blake had even been to their house for barbecues, had played video games with Tyler, and helped Emma with her car when she got her license. The first crack in Vincent's world appeared on a Tuesday morning in October. He'd forgotten his phone at home and drove back to get it before an important meeting with potential investors. The house was supposed to be empty. Diana was at her part-time job at the boutique, and the kids were at school. But her car was in the driveway. Vincent found them in his bedroom. His wife of 8 years and his trusted friend, tangled in sheets he'd bought for their anniversary. The confrontation was brief and ugly. Diana screamed that she'd been unhappy for years, that Vincent was cold and distant, that Blake understood her in ways Vincent never could. Blake just stood there, half-dressed and speechless, until Vincent told him to get out of his house. "This is over," Vincent had said to Diana, his voice deadly calm despite the rage burning in his chest. "Get a lawyer." But Diana had other plans. 3 days later, Vincent was arrested at his office in front of his employees and clients. The charges were domestic violence and assault with a deadly weapon. Diana's face was bruised, her arm was in a sling, and she had photographs of injuries she claimed Vincent had inflicted in a rage when he discovered her emotional affair that had never become physical. She was a compelling witness. Tears streaming down her face, she told the court how Vincent had become increasingly controlling and violent over the past year. How he'd threatened to kill her if she ever left him. How he'd attacked her with a wrench from his toolbox when she finally worked up the courage to ask for a divorce. The photographs were damning. The medical records were thorough. Emma and Tyler, coached well, testified about Vincent's explosive temper and how they'd been afraid of him for months. Even Blake took the stand, reluctantly admitting he'd seen bruises on Diana's arms that she'd claimed were from accidents. Vincent's lawyer was overworked and underpaid. The prosecution painted him as a classic abuser, successful businessman with anger issues who couldn't handle losing control over his wife. The fact that Vincent had no prior record of violence worked against him. The prosecutor argued it showed how well he'd hidden his true nature. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. Judge Patricia Hendricks sentenced Vincent to 7 years in state prison. As the gavel fell, Vincent saw Diana in the gallery, crying what looked like genuine tears of relief. Blake sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders in comfort. Emma and Tyler wouldn't even look at him. "You did this," Vincent said quietly as the bailiff approached with handcuffs. "You destroyed everything." Diana met his eyes for the first time since the trial began. Her tears had stopped, and for just a moment, Vincent saw something cold and satisfied in her expression. "You had everything," she whispered back. "And you gave me nothing. No attention, no romance, no life. You worked yourself to death and expected me to be grateful for a house and a bank account. Well, now you have nothing too." As they led him away, Vincent heard Blake ask Diana if she wanted to get dinner to celebrate. The case was closed. They were finally free to be together, and with Vincent's assets tied up in legal proceedings, they'd need to start planning their future. Vincent Torres went to prison that day, but the man who would emerge 7 years later would be someone entirely different. Someone who understood that mercy was a luxury he could no longer afford, and that some betrayals demanded a response that would make his accusers wish they'd simply killed him instead. Chapter 2. The Education. Millbrook Correctional Facility was a medium-security prison about 2 hours from the city where Vincent had built his life. The adjustment was brutal for a man who'd been his own boss for over a decade. The constant noise, the lack of privacy, the endless petty humiliations designed to break a man's spirit. Vincent absorbed it all with a growing coldness that worried even the hardened inmates around him. Most new prisoners either broke quickly or tried to prove themselves through violence. Vincent didn't either. He observed, learned, and adapted with a patience that unsettled everyone who met him. His cellmate for the first 2 years was a man named Rico Delgado, a former accountant who'd been laundering money for various criminal organizations before getting caught. "You're different," Rico told him one night after Vincent had been inside for 6 months. "Most guys come in here angry, crying, trying to fight the system. You came in like you were studying for a test." Rico was right. Vincent had turned his incarceration into an education. He learned about the informal networks that really ran the prison, the hierarchies based on respect rather than official authority. He studied the other inmates, not just the obvious predators, but the quiet ones who wielded real influence. He read voraciously, everything from legal texts to psychology books to biographies of men who'd rebuilt their lives after devastating setbacks. Most importantly, he learned about the world outside prison walls that he'd been too busy running a legitimate business to notice. Rico introduced him to concepts that would have horrified the old Vincent. How money could be moved without leaving traces, how people could be found no matter where they tried to hide, how information could be gathered and used as a weapon more effective than any gun. "The thing about revenge," Rico explained during one of their late-night conversations, "is that most people think it has to be immediate. They get hurt, they want to hurt back right away. But the best revenge is patient. You wait until your enemy thinks they're safe, until they've built something they care about, and then you take it all away piece by piece." Vincent received exactly 3 visitors during his 7 years inside. His lawyer came twice, once to explain how Diana had successfully filed for divorce and claimed half of all marital assets, and once to inform him that his business had been sold to pay legal fees and court-ordered restitution. The third visitor was his former foreman, Miguel Santos, who came after Vincent had been inside for 3 years. "I had to see you," Miguel said, his weathered hands shaking slightly as he sat across from Vincent in the visitor's room. "I had to tell you what really happened." Miguel had been with Torres Construction since the beginning. He'd watched Vincent build the company through honest work and fair dealing, had seen how Vincent treated his employees like family. After the arrest, Miguel had tried to keep the business running, but the legal complications and negative publicity made it impossible. "I know you didn't hurt her," Miguel said quietly. "In 15 years, I never saw you lose your temper with anyone, not even the guys who deserved it. But there's something else you need to know." Miguel had done some digging on his own time. Diana's first husband hadn't died in a motorcycle accident. He'd been murdered during a robbery that was never solved. The insurance payout had been substantial, enough for Diana to buy the house she'd lived in when she met Vincent. Miguel had also discovered that Blake Morrison's auto shop had been in serious financial trouble before Vincent went to prison. Somehow, in the months after the trial, Blake had managed to pay off all his debts and expand his business. "They planned this," Miguel said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can't prove it, but I know it. They needed you gone, and they needed your money." Vincent thanked Miguel for coming and told him never to visit again. Miguel's confirmation of what Vincent had already suspected simply added fuel to a fire that had been burning cold and steady for 3 years. The old Vincent Torres might have felt vindicated, might have started planning an appeal or looking for ways to prove his innocence. The new Vincent Torres began planning something else entirely. By his 5th year inside, Vincent had become something of a legend among the inmates. He'd never been involved in a single violent incident, but men twice his size gave him space and respect. He'd helped several inmates with legal appeals, had mediated disputes that could have turned deadly, and had somehow managed to accumulate resources and connections that extended far beyond the prison walls. Rico had been released after serving 4 years, but their friendship continued through carefully coded letters. Rico had landed on his feet quickly, his skills in financial management making him valuable to people who preferred to operate outside traditional banking systems. He'd mentioned several times that when Vincent got out, there would be opportunities for a man with his particular combination of intelligence, patience, and complete lack of sentimentality about legal niceties. During his final 2 years, Vincent completed a bachelor's degree in business administration through the prison's education program. He also spent countless hours in the law library, not looking for ways to overturn his conviction, but studying the intricacies of financial law, property rights, and corporate structures. He wrote letters to Diana exactly once per year on their wedding anniversary. Short, polite notes asking about Emma and Tyler's progress in school, mentioning small details about their lives that showed he was keeping track of them despite his incarceration. Diana never responded, but Vincent knew she received them because his lawyer confirmed they were being delivered. The last letter, sent 2 months before his release, was different from the others. Dear Diana, it read, I hope this letter finds you well. I'll be released from prison in 8 weeks, and I wanted you to know that I harbor no ill will toward you or Blake. I understand now that our marriage was a mistake from the beginning, and I'm grateful that you had the courage to end it. I've learned a great deal during my time here, and I'm looking forward to starting fresh. I won't be returning to the city where we lived together. Too many painful memories. I wish you and the children all the happiness in the world. Sincerely, Vincent. It was a masterpiece of misdirection. Vincent knew Diana would show it to Blake, probably to her lawyer, maybe even to Emma and Tyler. They would read it and feel relief, maybe even a little guilt about how things had ended. They would think Vincent Torres had been broken by prison, transformed into someone humble and defeated. They had no idea who was really coming home. Chapter 3. The Return. Vincent Torres walked out of Millbrook Correctional Facility on a cold morning in March with nothing but the clothes on his back and $127 in release money. Rico Delgado was waiting for him in a black BMW with tinted windows. You look good, Rico said as Vincent settled into the passenger seat. Prison agreed with you. It was true. Vincent had spent 7 years transforming his body and mind with the same methodical approach he'd once used to build houses. He was lean and hard now, his hair silver at the temples, his eyes cold as winter. The man who'd entered prison had been successful but soft. The man leaving was something else entirely. Everything set up? Vincent asked. Better than we discussed. My friends were very interested in your proposal. During his last year inside, Vincent had developed a business plan unlike anything he'd ever attempted. Using Rico as his intermediary, he'd made contact with a group of investors who specialized in ventures that required absolute discretion. They weren't criminals exactly, but they operated in the gray areas where legitimate business met the underground economy. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Vincent would establish himself as a private lender, offering fast cash to people who couldn't get traditional bank loans. The interest rates would be high, but not illegal. The terms would be strictly enforced, and the clientele would consist largely of people who'd burned their bridges with conventional financial institutions. His partners provided the initial capital, $5 million that had been cleaned through so many transactions, its origins were impossible to trace. In return, they would receive 50% of all profits for the first 5 years, after which Vincent would become the sole owner of the business. Within 6 months, Torres Private Lending had offices in 3 cities and a reputation for being expensive but reliable. Vincent's personal touch was requiring borrowers to provide extensive background information as part of their loan applications. Officially, this was for risk assessment. Unofficially, it allowed Vincent to build detailed files on people who might prove useful later. He'd also made other connections during his incarceration. Tommy Kowalski had been inside for armed robbery, but was really a master of electronic surveillance. Marcus Webb had been caught running a high-end chop shop, but possessed skills in acquiring and modifying vehicles that could be valuable to the right employer. Danny Cruz was inside for assault, but had extensive contacts throughout the service industry, restaurants, hotels, cleaning companies, places where information could be gathered and small favors could be arranged. All of them were scheduled for release within 2 years of Vincent's freedom. All of them had been offered positions with Torres Private Lending once they completed their parole requirements. All of them understood that Vincent Torres was not a man who forgot his friends or his enemies. Vincent rented a modest apartment under his own name in a neighborhood 40 miles from where he'd lived with Diana. He drove a used Toyota and dressed like a middle manager who'd never quite achieved his dreams. To anyone watching, he appeared to be a broken ex-convict trying to rebuild a simple life. In reality, he was gathering intelligence with the systematic thoroughness that had made him successful in construction. Diana and Blake were living in Vincent's old house, having married 6 months after his conviction. Blake had expanded his auto shop into a small chain of 3 locations. Emma had graduated high school and was attending the local community college. Tyler was 17 and captain of his high school basketball team. From the outside, they looked like a happy family that had overcome tragedy through love and perseverance. Local newspapers had even run a feature story about Diana and Blake's romance, portraying them as 2 people who'd found happiness despite the trauma of Diana's abusive first marriage. Vincent read that article 3 times, memorizing every detail of their new life together. The house they lived in, the cars they drove, the places they shopped, the restaurants they frequented. He learned their schedules, their habits, their friends. He discovered that Diana had developed a taste for expensive jewelry and designer clothes, that Blake had bought a boat he couldn't really afford, that both of them had become comfortable with a lifestyle funded by Vincent's stolen assets. But Vincent was patient. He didn't approach them, didn't try to contact Emma and Tyler, didn't do anything that might alert them to his presence. Instead, he built his business and waited for the right opportunity. That opportunity came on a Tuesday morning in October, exactly 8 years after he'd found Diana and Blake in his bedroom. Diana Torres walked into the main office of Torres Private Lending, desperate and broke. Vincent watched her through the security cameras as she sat in the waiting room, her designer clothes wrinkled, her hands shaking as she filled out the loan application. She looked older, worn down by stress and fear. Whatever had brought her here, it had shattered the comfortable life she'd built on the ruins of his. When his secretary buzzed to announce the appointment, Vincent took a moment to straighten his tie and check his appearance in the mirror behind his desk. He'd been waiting 8 years for this moment, planning it in excruciating detail, and now it was finally here. "Send her in," he said. The look on Diana's face when she saw him was worth every day he'd spent in prison. The color drained from her cheeks, her mouth opened and closed without sound, and for a moment Vincent thought she might actually faint. "Hello, Diana," he said quietly. "I understand you need to borrow some money." Chapter 4. The Trap. Diana staggered backward until she hit the office door, her loan application fluttering to the floor. Vincent made no move to help her, simply waited with the infinite patience prison had taught him until she managed to speak. "Vincent, how is this possible? You're supposed to be..." She couldn't finish the sentence. "In prison? I was released 18 months ago. Time off for good behavior." Vincent gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Please, sit down. You look like you've seen a ghost." Diana remained frozen against the door, her eyes darting around the office as if looking for an escape route. The space was impressive, mahogany furniture, leather-bound books, expensive artwork on the walls. Nothing like the modest construction office where Vincent had worked before his arrest. "I don't understand," she whispered. "How do you have all this? The business, this office." "I've been fortunate. Prison gave me time to think, to plan. When I got out, I discovered I had a talent for finance." Vincent picked up her loan application from where it had fallen. "According to this, you need $50,000. That's quite a lot of money. What's the emergency?" Diana's legs finally gave out, and she collapsed into the chair. Up close, Vincent could see the toll stress had taken on her. The woman who'd once been so confident in court, so certain of her control over the situation, now looked desperate and defeated. I won't borrow money from you," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Of course you can't. That would be awkward for everyone involved." Vincent leaned back in his chair, studying her like a scientist examining a specimen. "But I'm curious. What could possibly bring my ex-wife to my office, begging for money?" The word begging hit her like a physical blow. Diana's face flushed red, but she didn't deny it. Whatever had driven her here was serious enough to overcome her pride. "Where's Blake?" Vincent asked casually. "I assume he's tried the banks already." Diana's composure cracked completely. Tears started flowing down her cheeks as 8 years of carefully maintained lies began to crumble. "He's gone," she sobbed. 3 months ago, he left, cleaned out our accounts, took everything, and disappeared. I don't even know where he is. Vincent nodded as if this information wasn't particularly surprising. In fact, Blake's disappearance had been carefully orchestrated over the past year through a series of financial pressures and attractive opportunities that had led him exactly where Vincent wanted him to go. That must have been difficult, Vincent said with mock sympathy. Did he leave a note? Any explanation? He said he never loved me, that I was just a convenient way to get what he wanted, that he'd been planning to leave since before you went to prison. Diana's voice broke completely. He said sleeping with me was the worst part of the whole thing, that he'd rather have just robbed you directly. The irony wasn't lost on Vincent. Blake had used almost the exact words Diana had spoken to him years earlier, when she'd said Vincent had given her nothing. Now she was discovering what real betrayal felt like. I see. And the children? Emma dropped out of college when the money ran out. She's working at a grocery store, trying to save up to go back. Tyler blames me for everything. He barely speaks to me. Diana wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. The house is in foreclosure. We owe money everywhere. I don't know what else to do. Vincent let the silence stretch between them, watching her squirm. Finally, he picked up his phone and buzzed his secretary. Helen, please prepare a standard loan agreement for $50,000. 36-month term, standard rates. Diana's head snapped up. You'll really lend me the money? I'm a businessman, Diana. Personal feelings don't enter into it. Vincent's tone was perfectly professional. However, our standard interest rate is 32% annually, and we require full background checks on all borrowers. There's also a personal guarantee clause. If you default, we can pursue all assets, including any property held jointly with family members. The terms were technically legal but effectively predatory. Diana would end up paying back over $90,000, and any missed payment would put Emma and Tyler at financial risk as well. It was a trap disguised as salvation. 32%. Diana's voice was barely a whisper. It's a high-risk loan. You have no collateral, no steady income, and a history of, let's call it poor financial decision-making. Vincent shrugged. Of course, if you can find better terms elsewhere, I'd encourage you to pursue them. They both knew she'd already tried everywhere else. Diana Torres, the woman who'd once destroyed Vincent's life with false accusations, now had no choice but to accept whatever terms he offered. There is one other option, Vincent said, as if the thought had just occurred to him. I occasionally make exceptions to our standard policies for borrowers with unique circumstances. I could offer you a lower rate, say 12%, if you're willing to provide something beyond the usual collateral. Hope flickered in Diana's eyes. What kind of something? Vincent opened his desk drawer and pulled out a thick manila folder. Inside were photographs, documents, and a detailed timeline spanning the past 8 years. Diana's face went white as she recognized some of the images. Information, Diana. Complete and honest information about what really happened 8 years ago. Who planned what, when decisions were made, how the whole thing was orchestrated. Vincent's voice remained conversational, but there was steel underneath. I'm not interested in revenge or legal action. The statute of limitations has passed on most of it anyway. I'm simply curious about the details. Diana stared at the folder as if it contained a poisonous snake. She understood the choice Vincent was offering her, financial survival in exchange for a complete confession of her crimes. I can't, she whispered. Of course you can. You already destroyed my life once with lies. Now you can rebuild yours with the truth. Vincent closed the folder and placed it between them. Take some time to think about it. You have until tomorrow morning to decide. Diana stood on shaking legs, moving toward the door like a woman walking to her execution. Oh, and Diana? Vincent's voice stopped her at the threshold. When you go home tonight, give my regards to Emma and Tyler. Tell them their stepfather is thinking about them. After she left, Vincent sat alone in his office, savoring the moment he'd been planning for years. Diana thought she was choosing between financial ruin and humiliation. She had no idea that Vincent had already set events in motion that would destroy everything she'd built, regardless of what decision she made. The trap wasn't the loan agreement. The trap was making her think she still had choices. Chapter 5, The Confession. Diana didn't return the next morning. Instead, she sent Emma, who arrived at Vincent's office looking nervous but determined. She was 24 now, with her mother's blonde hair but stronger features that reminded Vincent of Diana's first husband. The girl he'd once considered his daughter now looked at him with wary recognition. "Hello, Emma," Vincent said gently. "You've grown up." Mr. Torres. She wouldn't call him Dad, wouldn't even use his first name. "Mom sent me to pick up the papers." She decided to accept the standard terms? Emma nodded, though Vincent could see the strain in her face. 32% interest would destroy what little was left of their family's finances. But Diana had apparently chosen financial ruin over confession. "I'm disappointed," Vincent said, pulling out the loan documents. "I was hoping your mother would choose the more reasonable option." "She couldn't." Emma's voice was barely above a whisper. She said if she told you what you wanted to know, it would hurt too many people." Vincent studied the young woman across from him, noting the dark circles under her eyes, the cheap clothes, the weight she'd lost since he'd last seen her. Diana's choices had already hurt Emma more than any confession could. "What do you think, Emma? Do you believe your mother was telling the truth about what happened between us?" Emma's composure cracked slightly. "I don't. I was 16. I believed what she told me to believe. And now? You're an adult. You've had 8 years to think about it. I don't want to talk about this." Emma reached for the loan papers, but Vincent pulled them back. "The man you knew as your stepfather for 8 years, the one who taught you to drive, who helped you with homework, who went to every school play and basketball game. Do you really think that man was capable of beating your mother with a wrench?" Tears started forming in Emma's eyes. People change. People can seem one way and really be different. Yes, they can. Your mother seemed loving and loyal, but she was really planning to destroy me with the help of my best friend. Blake seemed trustworthy and honest, but he really stole everything you had and abandoned you. Vincent leaned forward. "I seem like I'm offering you a way to save your family's home, but I'm really doing something else entirely." Emma went pale. "What do you mean?" Vincent picked up his phone and pressed a button. "Helen, please send Mr. Cruz in." Danny Cruz entered the office carrying a briefcase and wearing an expensive suit that couldn't quite hide the prison tattoos on his hands. He nodded to Vincent and placed the briefcase on the desk without looking at Emma. "Emma, meet Danny Cruz." Danny used to work for a company that provided security services to various businesses around the city. He's very good at gathering information about people. Danny opened the briefcase and pulled out a thick file folder. "Everything you requested, boss. Took 3 months to put together, but it's comprehensive." Vincent opened the folder and spread its contents across his desk. Bank records, photographs, phone logs, credit card statements, employment records, a complete picture of Blake Morrison's life from the day Vincent was arrested until the day he disappeared. "Your stepfather was a very busy man while I was in prison," Vincent said, passing some of the documents to Emma. "Did you know he had gambling debts of over $200,000? Or that he'd been skimming money from his auto shop's insurance claims for years?" Emma stared at the papers without really seeing them. "I don't understand. Why are you showing me this?" "Because your mother thinks I want revenge. She thinks I'm planning to hurt the people who hurt me. But revenge is for people who still care about the outcome." Vincent's voice remained calm, almost gentle. "I don't want revenge, Emma. I want justice. And justice requires truth." Vincent pulled out another set of documents, these ones bearing official letterheads and legal seals. "Blake Morrison is currently in custody in Nevada, charged with running an illegal gambling operation and defrauding insurance companies." The evidence was provided by an anonymous tipster who'd been investigating his activities for several years. Vincent smiled coldly. "He's looking at 15 to 20 years in federal prison." Emma's hands shook as she processed this information. You did this?" "I provided evidence of actual crimes to the appropriate authorities. Blake destroyed himself through his own choices. I simply made sure those choices had consequences." Vincent gathered the papers back into neat stacks. "Now, here's what's going to happen next." Vincent pulled out a different loan agreement, this one with much more reasonable terms. 12% interest, extended payment schedule, no personal guarantees against family members. Your mother can sign this agreement and get the money she needs. All I require in return is a complete and honest account of how she and Blake planned my destruction. Not for legal purposes, just for my own peace of mind. And if she refuses, then she signs the other agreement and pays 32% interest. Either way, she gets the money. The only difference is whether she chooses to end 8 years of lies or continue living with them. Emma looked back and forth between the two agreements, understanding the choice, but not the implications. There's something else, Vincent continued. Blake's arrest has freed up certain assets that were seized as part of his criminal investigation. Assets that were originally stolen from me before I went to prison. The FBI will be returning approximately $800,000 to my estate within the next 60 days. Emma's eyes widened. That money would solve all their problems, not just temporarily, but permanently. I'm prepared to share that money with the victims of Blake's other crimes, including your family, since you were clearly unaware of his activities and suffered when he abandoned you. Vincent paused, letting the implications sink in. But only if your mother tells me the truth. All of it. It was a masterpiece of manipulation. Vincent was offering Diana exactly what she needed, enough money to rebuild her life, while making it seem like a generous gesture rather than calculated revenge. Diana would get her financial salvation, but only after confessing to the crimes that had destroyed Vincent's life. You're really not the same person anymore, Emma said quietly. No, I'm not. Prison taught me that mercy is a luxury I can't afford. But I'm not cruel, Emma. I could have let your family lose everything and walked away. Instead, I'm offering a way forward that serves justice while protecting innocent people. Emma stood up slowly, both loan agreements in her hands. I'll give these to Mom. Tell her she has 24 hours to decide. And Emma, Vincent's voice stopped her at the door. Tell her that lying to me again would be the worst mistake she could possibly make. After Emma left, Danny Cruz whistled low. Cold as ice, boss. I almost feel sorry for the woman. Don't, Vincent replied, already turning his attention to other business. She made her choices 8 years ago. Now she gets to live with the consequences. Vincent had spent 7 years in prison planning this moment. Diana thought she was choosing between financial ruin and public humiliation. She still didn't understand that Vincent Torres no longer made deals. He issued ultimatums. And either way, justice would finally be served. Chapter 6. The Truth. Diana came to Vincent's office at exactly 9 a.m. the next morning, accompanied by Emma and Tyler. Vincent's stepson had grown into a tall, athletic young man who looked nothing like the scared 14-year-old who'd testified against him 8 years earlier. Tyler's resemblance to his biological father was striking. The same strong jaw, the same intense eyes that had once looked at Vincent with hero worship. Mr. Torres, Tyler said formally, shaking Vincent's hand with a grip that was meant to intimidate. Mom says you're willing to help us. I'm willing to do business with your family, Vincent corrected. Whether that constitutes help depends on your perspective. Diana looked like she'd aged 10 years in the past 48 hours. She'd made her choice, and it was written in the defeat on her face. She placed the loan agreement with the 12% interest rate on Vincent's desk, signed in blue ink with a trembling hand. I'll tell you what you want to know, she said quietly. But not in front of the kids. Actually, I think they should hear this. Vincent's tone left no room for argument. They're adults now, and they deserve to understand what really happened to their family. Emma and Tyler exchanged glances, neither of them understanding the full scope of what was about to be revealed. Vincent activated a digital recorder on his desk and gestured for everyone to sit down. Start at the beginning, he said. When did you first decide to destroy me? Diana was quiet for so long that Vincent thought she might have changed her mind. Finally, she began to speak in a voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't supposed to happen like it did. Blake and we started the affair about a year before you found us. But it wasn't planned. It just happened. The affair wasn't planned, Vincent agreed. But my arrest was. When did you start discussing that? Diana's hands twisted in her lap. Blake had debts. Gambling debts to some very dangerous people. They were threatening to kill him if he didn't pay. We needed money, and you had money, but you wouldn't just give it to us. So you decided to take it. Blake suggested the divorce, but you would have fought it. You would have made it messy and expensive. And even if I got half of everything, Blake needed more than that to pay off his debts. Tyler leaned forward in his chair. Wait, you're saying Blake needed money for gambling? Diana couldn't meet her son's eyes. $200,000. If he didn't pay it back, they were going to hurt him. Hurt all of us. So you decided to frame me for assault, Vincent said matter-of-factly. Blake knew someone who could make it look real. The bruises, the broken arm, all of it. We practiced the story for weeks. Diana's voice was getting stronger now, as if confessing was actually a relief. The hardest part was getting Emma and Tyler to believe it. Emma went white. You made us lie in court? I convinced you it was true. I told you Vincent had been hitting me for months, that you just hadn't seen it because he was careful. I said he'd threatened to kill all of us if anyone found out. Diana was crying now, but Vincent felt no sympathy. I made you believe you were protecting me. Tyler stood up abruptly, his chair clattering backward. You made us think Dad was a monster. You made us testify against him. You made us help send him to prison for something he didn't do. He's not your father. Diana snapped, her facade finally cracking completely. Your real father is dead, and Vincent was just someone who paid the bills. Someone who gave us a house and a comfortable life, but never really loved us. That's not true, Emma said, her voice breaking. He loved us. He was there for everything. Every school event, every birthday, every time we needed help with anything. He loved the idea of having a family, Diana shot back. But he was married to his work. I was lonely. The kids needed more attention than he could give, and Blake actually listened to me. Vincent had heard enough self-justification. Tell them about the insurance money. Diana's face went pale again. What insurance money? From your first husband's death. The policy that paid out $900,000 when he was killed in that random robbery that was never solved. The silence in the room was deafening. Emma and Tyler stared at their mother with growing horror as the implications of Vincent's words sank in. You had your first husband killed, Vincent continued calmly. Blake Morrison was involved in that murder, which is how you met him. The two of you used that insurance money to buy the house where we lived, to fund Blake's auto shop, and to create the comfortable life that attracted me in the first place. That's not. I never. Diana was stammering, but her denials lacked conviction. Vincent pulled out another file folder, this one containing police reports, insurance documents, and surveillance photographs. Blake Morrison was employed by a company that provided security for the warehouse where your first husband was killed. He knew the victim's schedule, had access to the building, and received a substantial cash payment 3 days after the murder. Tyler sank back into his chair, his face gray with shock. Mom, please tell me this isn't true. Diana looked around the room at the 3 people staring at her with disgust and betrayal. For a moment, Vincent thought she might try to continue lying. Then something inside her broke completely. Richard was going to leave me, she whispered. He'd found out about the affair with Blake and was going to file for divorce. He was going to take the kids and leave me with nothing. We couldn't let that happen. Emma covered her face with her hands and started sobbing. Tyler just stared at his mother as if seeing her for the first time. Vincent felt a cold satisfaction settle over him. Finally, after 8 years, the complete truth was out. So you and Blake have been partners in murder and fraud for over a decade, Vincent summarized. You killed your first husband for his insurance money. Then you framed me for assault to steal my assets and pay Blake's gambling debts. Did I miss anything? Diana shook her head, unable to speak. Vincent turned off the recorder and picked up his phone. Helen, please have Mr. Cruz bring in the federal agents who are waiting downstairs. Diana's head snapped up. Federal agents? The FBI has been very interested in hearing your confession about Richard Morrison's murder. They're also quite pleased to have confirmation that Blake Morrison was involved in insurance fraud going back over a decade. Vincent's smile was cold and final. I told you that mercy is a luxury I can't afford. What I didn't mention is that justice sometimes requires outside assistance. The office door opened and Danny Cruz entered with 2 FBI agents who looked like they'd been waiting for this moment for a very long time. Diana Torres, the lead agent said, pulling out handcuffs. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and perjury. As they read Diana her rights, she looked at Vincent with pure hatred. You said you just wanted the truth. I didn't want the truth. I also wanted justice. Today I got both. Vincent stood up and straightened his tie. Emma, Tyler, you'll find that the loan has been forgiven and the money Blake stole has been deposited into a trust fund for your education and future. You're victims in this, not accomplices. As they led Diana away, she turned back one last time. You haven't won anything, she snarled. You're still the same cold, empty man you always were. The only difference is now everyone can see it. Vincent watched through his office window as they put her in the back of an unmarked car. Emma and Tyler stood on the sidewalk, holding each other and crying, their entire understanding of their family history shattered in the space of an hour. Vincent felt no satisfaction at their pain. They were innocent victims of their mother's choices. But he felt no guilt either. Sometimes justice required destroying lives that had been built on lies. 8 years ago, Diana Torres had told him he was nothing. Today, she'd learned what nothing really looked like. Chapter 7. The Reckoning. 6 months after Diana's arrest, Vincent sat in his office reading the newspaper account of her sentencing. 25 years to life for first-degree murder, to be served consecutively with sentences for insurance fraud and perjury. Blake Morrison had received a similar sentence in Nevada before being extradited to face charges in Richard Morrison's murder. Emma knocked on his office door, looking healthier than she had in years. The stress lines around her eyes had faded, and she'd gained back the weight she'd lost during her family's financial crisis. "Do you have a few minutes?" she asked. "Of course. How's school?" Emma had re-enrolled in college using money from the trust Vincent had established. She was studying criminal justice, with plans to become a victim's advocate. Tyler had chosen a different path, accepting a full basketball scholarship to a university 3 states away. Both of them had legally changed their last names, wanting no connection to either Diana or Blake Morrison. "I wanted to thank you," Emma said, settling into the chair across from Vincent's desk. "For the money, for the truth, for giving us a chance to start over. You don't need to thank me. You and Tyler were victims of your mother's choices." "Were we, though?" Emma's voice was thoughtful. "I mean, we lived in your house for 8 years. We ate food you bought, drove cars you paid for, went to schools you could afford because of your business. We were happy, even if Mom wasn't." Vincent didn't respond immediately. Over the past 6 months, he'd found himself thinking about his life before prison more often than he'd expected. Not with nostalgia, but with a kind of clinical analysis of what had worked and what hadn't. "Your mother wasn't entirely wrong," he said finally. "I was married to my work. I thought providing for the family was the same thing as caring for them. Maybe, but you never lied to us. You never manipulated us or used us as pawns in some scheme. You just worked hard and expected us to be grateful for what that work provided." Emma pulled an envelope from her purse and placed it on Vincent's desk. "Tyler wanted me to give you this." Inside was a letter written in Tyler's careful handwriting, along with a photograph from his high school graduation. In the picture, Tyler was wearing his cap and gown, holding his diploma, smiling at the camera. On the back, he'd written, "For the man who taught me that real strength means taking care of your family." The letter was brief, but heartfelt. Tyler thanked Vincent for the trust fund, for revealing the truth about their mother, and for helping him and Emma understand the difference between being loved and being used. He'd included his new address at college and an invitation for Vincent to attend his graduation in 4 years. "He misses you," Emma said quietly. "We both do. Not the idea of having a father figure, but specifically you. The way you used to help with homework, the way you never missed a basketball game, the way you made us feel safe." Vincent folded the letter carefully and placed it in his desk drawer. "Your mother was right about one thing. I am cold now. I'm not the same person who raised you." "No, you're not. But that doesn't mean you're a bad person. You're just someone who learned that the world is crueler than you thought it was." Emma leaned forward. "The question is, what are you going to do with the rest of your life?" It was a question Vincent had been avoiding for months. His business was successful, his revenge was complete, and his enemies were paying for their crimes. He'd achieved everything he'd planned during those 7 years in prison. But now what? "I don't know," he admitted. "Tyler and I have been talking. We want to help you figure it out." Emma pulled out another document, this one bearing the letterhead of a prestigious law firm. "We're filing a civil lawsuit against Mom's estate and Blake's assets for the emotional damage they caused us through their lies and manipulation. We want you to be our co-plaintiff." Vincent read through the documents with professional interest. It was a solid case that would likely result in substantial financial compensation for the psychological trauma Emma and Tyler had suffered. "This isn't about money," Emma continued. "It's about making a public record of what really happened. About clearing your name officially, not just in criminal court, but in the civil system too. And after that, you decide who you want to be. The Vincent Torres who raised us, or the Vincent Torres who destroyed our mother." Emma's voice was gentle but firm. "You can't be both forever." Vincent looked out his office window at the city where he'd built his first business, lost everything, and then built something new and harder in its place. The view was different from this height, but the streets were the same ones where he'd once driven his pickup truck to construction sites, back when he'd believed in fairness and hard work and the basic decency of people. Your mother said I hadn't won anything, Vincent said. That I was still the same empty man I'd always been. Mom was wrong about a lot of things, but she was especially wrong about that. Emma stood up and moved toward the door. You're not empty, Vincent. You're just hurt. And hurt people can heal if they choose to. After Emma left, Vincent sat alone in his office for a long time, thinking about choices and consequences and the difference between justice and revenge. He'd spent 8 years planning Diana's destruction, and he'd succeeded beyond his wildest expectations. She would die in prison, Blake would never be free again, and the truth about their crimes was a matter of public record. But Emma was right. He couldn't live as an instrument of vengeance forever. Eventually, he would have to decide what kind of man he wanted to be in a world where his enemies were already defeated. Vincent pulled out Tyler's letter and read it again, focusing on the part about real strength, meaning taking care of your family. The boy had learned that lesson even while believing Vincent was a violent criminal. Maybe there was something to be salvaged from those 8 years after all. Vincent picked up his phone and dialed Rico Delgado's number. Rico? It's Vincent. I want to discuss expanding the business in a different direction. Community development, maybe some legitimate construction projects. I think it's time to build something that doesn't involve destroying people. Rico laughed. Going soft in your old age. Maybe. Or maybe I'm finally smart enough to know the difference between winning and succeeding. As Vincent hung up the phone, he felt something he hadn't experienced in 8 years. A sense of possibility that wasn't tied to revenge or destruction. Diana Torres had been wrong about many things, but she'd been right about one. Vincent was no longer the man he'd been before prison. The question was whether that change had to be permanent. Chapter 8. The Choice. 1 year after Diana's sentencing, Vincent received an unexpected visitor. Judge Patricia Hendricks, the woman who had sentenced him to 7 years in prison, sat across from his desk looking uncomfortable and considerably older than her 63 years. I'm retiring next month, she said without preamble. 28 years on the bench, and your case is the one that's kept me awake at night. Vincent poured coffee for both of them, his movements deliberate and controlled. I imagine it's difficult to learn you sent an innocent man to prison based on perjured testimony. The FBI briefed me on the investigation. Diana Morrison's confession, the evidence about her first husband's murder, Blake Morrison's gambling debts, all of it. Judge Hendricks stirred her coffee with shaking hands. I should have seen through it. The timeline was too convenient, the witnesses too rehearsed. Your lack of any prior violent behavior should have been a red flag, not a prosecutorial advantage. You made a decision based on the evidence presented to you. The fault lies with the people who manufactured that evidence. That's generous of you to say, but I've been a judge long enough to recognize when something doesn't feel right, and I ignored that instinct because the case seemed straightforward. She looked directly at Vincent for the first time since arriving. I failed you, Mr. Torres. I failed the system I swore to uphold. Vincent studied the woman who had fundamentally altered the course of his life with a single decision. Judge Hendricks had built a reputation for fairness and thorough deliberation over her career. Her mistake with Vincent's case was an aberration, not a pattern. What do you want from me, Your Honor? I want to know if you can forgive an old woman's failure of judgment. The request hung in the air between them. Vincent had spent so much energy on punishing the people who had deliberately wronged him that he'd never considered what to do about those who had done so accidentally. Forgiveness is a luxury I'm still learning to afford, Vincent said finally. But I don't hold you responsible for Diana's crimes. Judge Hendricks nodded, though she didn't look entirely satisfied with his answer. There's something else. I've been in contact with the State Attorney General's office about reviewing other cases from the same time period. Cases where the prosecution relied heavily on testimony from spouses claiming domestic violence. You think there might be other Diana Torreses out there? I think your ex-wife was sophisticated enough to research successful prosecution strategies before implementing her plan. If she studied other cases to perfect her approach, she might have learned from women who were equally sophisticated. Judge Hendricks pulled out a briefcase and removed a thick folder. I've identified 12 cases from the past decade that share similar patterns. Men with no prior history of violence, sudden accusations of escalating abuse, convenient timing around divorce proceedings. Vincent opened the folder and scanned the case summaries. Several of the situations looked disturbingly familiar. Successful men destroyed by ex-wives who seemed to benefit financially from their imprisonment. What are you asking me to do? Help me investigate. Your business gives you resources and connections that a retired judge doesn't have. More importantly, you understand the mindset of someone who's been falsely accused. You might see patterns that investigators miss. It was an intriguing proposal. Vincent had built Torres Private Lending into a multi-million-dollar operation, but the work no longer challenged him the way construction had. The business ran itself now, managed by competent subordinates who didn't require constant oversight. There would be compensation, of course, Judge Hendricks continued. The Attorney General's office has allocated substantial funds for this investigation. But I suspect money isn't your primary motivation. No, it's not. Vincent closed the folder and leaned back in his chair. Give me a week to consider it. After Judge Hendricks left, Vincent found himself thinking about Emma's question from months earlier. What was he going to do with the rest of his life? He'd achieved his revenge against Diana and Blake, cleared his name, and built a successful business. But none of that had filled the emptiness that prison had carved out of his soul. That evening, Vincent drove to the cemetery where Richard Morrison was buried. Emma and Tyler visited their father's grave regularly now, finally able to mourn him properly after learning the truth about his death. Vincent had never been there before, but he felt compelled to see the headstone of the man whose murder had set everything in motion. The grave was well maintained, with fresh flowers that Emma must have placed there recently. The inscription was simple: Richard Morrison, beloved father, taken too soon. I'm sorry, Vincent said aloud, feeling somewhat foolish but needing to say the words. I'm sorry I couldn't protect your children from what she put them through. Vincent thought about the chain of events that had led him to this moment. Richard Morrison's murder had given Diana the insurance money to appear wealthy enough to attract Vincent. Her relationship with Blake, forged through that murder, had provided the means to frame Vincent for assault. Vincent's imprisonment had taught him the skills and connections necessary to ultimately destroy both of them. In a twisted way, Richard Morrison's death had made Vincent's revenge possible. The question was whether Vincent could use the abilities he'd gained for something other than destruction. Vincent's phone buzzed with a text message from Tyler, graduated magna cum laude. Hope you're proud of the man you helped raise. Attached was a photo of Tyler in his graduation cap and gown, holding his diploma and grinning at the camera. He looked confident and happy, nothing like the scared teenager who'd testified against Vincent 8 years earlier. Vincent typed back, very proud. Your father would be proud too. For the first time in 8 years, Vincent was thinking about Richard Morrison not as a victim whose death had started a chain of events, but as a father who would have wanted his children to thrive despite the tragedy that had shaped their lives. Vincent made his decision that night. He called Judge Hendricks and accepted her proposal to investigate the other suspicious domestic violence cases. But he also made a decision about his own future that went beyond professional considerations. The next morning, Vincent hired a private investigator to locate every person who had been wrongfully convicted based on false domestic violence allegations. Not just the cases Judge Hendricks had identified, but all of them, going back 15 years. Vincent Torres was going to use the resources and skills he'd gained through his own destruction to help other innocent people rebuild their lives. It wasn't redemption exactly, but it was something more constructive than revenge. Diana had been wrong about him being empty, but she'd been right about him being cold. The question was whether a cold man could still choose to do warm things, even if his motivations remained analytical rather than emotional. Vincent thought about Tyler's graduation photo and Emma's new career helping crime victims. Maybe the measure of a man wasn't whether he could feel warmth, but whether he could create it for others. It was worth finding out. Chapter 9. The Legacy. 5 years after his release from prison, Vincent Torres stood before a packed courtroom listening to Judge Margaret Walsh read the verdict in the case of State versus Henderson. We the jury find the defendant, Marcus Henderson, not guilty of all charges. It was Vincent's 14th exoneration. 14 men who had been falsely imprisoned for domestic violence they never committed, freed through the investigative work of the Torres Foundation for Criminal Justice Reform. Vincent had founded the organization with money from his lending business and staffed it with former inmates who understood the system's failures from personal experience. Marcus Henderson broke down sobbing as his wife and children rushed to embrace him. He'd spent 3 years in prison based on accusations from his ex-wife, who had been coached by the same lawyer who had represented Diana in her original divorce proceedings. The pattern was always the same: ambitious women with expensive legal representation, targeting successful men with substantial assets, using false abuse allegations to gain advantage in divorce proceedings. Emma Terezchin, now using her married name, sat in the gallery taking notes for the Foundation's case files. She'd finished law school and joined the Foundation as its lead legal advocate, specializing in helping exonerated men navigate the complex process of rebuilding their lives after release. Tyler Morrison, who had legally changed his last name back to honor his biological father, played professional basketball in Europe now. He visited whenever he was in the country and had become one of the Foundation's most effective fundraisers, speaking at events about the importance of protecting innocent people from false accusations. Vincent's work with the Foundation had earned him recognition he never sought: magazine profiles, speaking engagements, meetings with lawmakers about criminal justice reform. People called him a hero, a champion of the wrongfully accused, a man who had turned personal tragedy into public service. Vincent knew the truth was more complicated. He'd started this work not out of compassion, but out of a desire to find purpose after his revenge was complete. The satisfaction he felt when another innocent man walked free was real, but it was the satisfaction of solving a complex problem, not the warmth of human connection. Still, the work mattered. 14 men were free who wouldn't have been otherwise. Dozens of children had their fathers back. The legal system was slowly changing as prosecutors became more cautious about cases that relied solely on spousal testimony, with no corroborating evidence. After the courthouse celebration, Vincent returned to his office to find Rico Delgado waiting for him. Rico had become the Foundation's director of operations, his experience with underground networks proving invaluable for locating witnesses and evidence that official investigators had missed. "Good news and bad news," Rico said, settling into his familiar chair across from Vincent's desk. "The good news is we've got another case. Anthony Russo, convicted 5 years ago in Chicago. His ex-wife's story has holes you could drive a truck through. And the bad news? Blake Morrison died in prison last week, stabbed by another inmate over a gambling debt." Vincent felt nothing at the news. Blake's death was simply a fact, like the weather or the stock market closing numbers. The man who had betrayed Vincent no longer existed in any meaningful way. He'd been destroyed the moment Diana confessed to their crimes. "How's Diana taking it?" Vincent asked. "She doesn't know yet. Prison officials are still notifying next of kin." Rico studied Vincent's face. "You want me to have someone tell her you heard about it?" "No. Blake Morrison's death has nothing to do with me." It was true. Vincent had moved so far beyond his original thirst for revenge that his former enemies had become irrelevant to his life. Diana would spend the rest of her life in prison regardless of what happened to Blake. Blake's death changed nothing about the past and nothing about the future. That evening, Vincent had dinner with Emma and her husband David at their apartment. It had become a monthly tradition, one of the few personal relationships Vincent maintained outside of his work. Emma was pregnant with their first child, and David was a public defender who shared Vincent's commitment to protecting the innocent. "Have you thought about what happens when you're done?" Emma asked over dessert. "Done with what?" "The Foundation. The exonerations. Eventually, you'll have helped everyone you can help." "What then?" It was a question Vincent had been avoiding. The Foundation's work was important, but it wasn't infinite. There weren't unlimited numbers of innocent men in prison, and the legal system was already adapting to prevent the kind of manipulations Diana had used. "I don't know," Vincent admitted. "I've never been good at planning for happiness." "Maybe that's the problem," David suggested. "You plan for justice, for revenge, for solving other people's problems. But when's the last time you planned for your own life?" Vincent considered the question seriously. He lived in a comfortable but Spartan apartment, drove a reliable but unremarkable car, and had no hobbies or interests beyond his work. He'd built a successful business and a meaningful foundation, but he hadn't built a life. "Tyler called earlier," Emma said. "His team is playing in the States next month, and he wants you to come to a game. He's never given up on the idea that you might want to be part of our family again." "I'm not the same person who raised you," Vincent reminded her. "No, you're not. But you're still the person who cared enough about justice to spend 5 years helping strangers. You're still the person who made sure Tyler and I had the money to rebuild our lives after Mom's arrest." Emma reached across the table and touched his hand. "You're still capable of love, Vincent. You just choose not to access it." After dinner, Vincent walked the city streets, thinking about Emma's words. He passed the construction sites where his old company had built apartment buildings and office complexes. The buildings were still there, still solid, still serving their purpose years after Vincent had stopped thinking about them. Maybe that was the answer to Emma's question about what came after the foundation's work was done. Maybe Vincent didn't need to find a grand purpose for the rest of his life. Maybe he just needed to build something that would last, the way he'd built houses and businesses and a foundation that would continue helping people long after he was gone. Vincent's phone rang as he walked. Tyler's name appeared on the screen. "Dad." Tyler's voice was uncertain, using the title he'd avoided for 8 years. "I know you probably saw the news about Blake. I wanted to make sure you were okay." "I'm fine. How are you handling it?" "Honestly, I'm relieved. I kept worrying that someday he'd get out of prison and try to contact me or Emma. Now that can't happen." Tyler paused. "Is that wrong? To be relieved that someone died?" "No," Vincent said quietly. "Some people forfeit the right to be mourned. Will you come to my game next month? I know it's not something you usually do, but I'd really like you to be there." Vincent looked up at the skyline of the city where he'd lost everything and then rebuilt something different in its place. Somewhere in this city, Diana Torres was sitting in a prison cell, paying for her crimes. Somewhere else, 14 men were free because Vincent had chosen to help them rather than simply destroy their accusers. "Yes," Vincent said. "I'll be there." It wasn't redemption, and it wasn't a return to the man he'd been before prison. But it was a choice to build something new rather than simply tearing down what already existed. Emma had been right about one thing. Vincent was still capable of love. He'd just forgotten that love didn't always have to be warm to be real. Sometimes love was cold and analytical and protective, like a father who spent 5 years helping strangers because he couldn't help his own children go back in time and have a different childhood. Vincent Torres had spent 8 years learning that some betrayals were unforgivable. Now he was learning that some relationships were irreplaceable, even when they'd been broken and rebuilt into something entirely new. Diana had called him nothing, and for a long time, she'd been right. But nothing could be filled with something if a man chose to do the work. Vincent was finally ready to choose. Epilogue. 10 years after his release from prison, Vincent Torres received a letter from Diana Morrison, now serving her sentence in a maximum security facility 3 states away. He almost threw it away unopened, but curiosity got the better of him. The letter was brief and written in Diana's familiar handwriting, though it looked shakier than he remembered. "Vincent," it read, "I heard about the foundation and the work you're doing. I know you'll never forgive me, and I'm not asking you to. But I wanted you to know that I understand now what I took from you. Not just the money or the freedom, but the man you were before I destroyed him. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for all of it. Diana." Vincent read the letter twice, then placed it in his desk drawer next to Tyler's graduation photo and Emma's wedding invitation. Not as mementos of forgiveness, but as reminders of how far he'd traveled from the man who'd once believed in the fundamental goodness of people. That afternoon, Vincent attended Tyler's wedding to a young woman who reminded him of Emma, strong, intelligent, and completely unimpressed by Tyler's athletic fame. Emma's daughter, now 2 years old, called Vincent Grandpa Vince, and had no idea her grandmother was a convicted murderer. During the reception, Vincent stood at the edge of the dance floor, watching his rebuilt family celebrate new beginnings. Rico approached with 2 glasses of champagne. "Penny for your thoughts, boss. I was thinking about Diana's letter." She apologized. "Too little, too late?" Vincent considered the question. "No, it's exactly the right amount, at exactly the right time. She didn't ask for forgiveness or try to justify what she did. She just acknowledged the damage and accepted responsibility." "You thinking about responding?" "No. Some conversations don't require responses." Vincent watched Tyler dance with his new wife, Emma laugh with her husband, and his granddaughter toddle between relatives who would give her the stable, loving childhood her mother and uncle never had. Diana Torres had been wrong about many things, but she'd been right about one. Vincent was no longer the man he'd been before prison. The question was whether that had been a loss or an evolution. Looking at his family, broken, rebuilt, and stronger for having survived the breaking, Vincent decided it had been both. Some transformations were worth the cost. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.